Welcome back, everybody, to JMS Talks Comics, a new short video series I'll be doing talking about the industry I love and also the industry that rips my heart out on a daily basis. But before we go any further, please subscribe, hit the like button, hit the bell for notifications, and just so you know, this channel is monetized and now has the ability to accept members. If you want to become a member of the Superior Court, please join up today. We will be doing 4-month art giveaways, member-only streams where you can watch me work on Reaper Destroyer as I go throughout the rest of the year. Alright, so what are we talking about today? I want to talk about, do you remember when you loved comics? I mean, when you really loved comics. I know you might say today, yeah, I love comics. I love the characters, I love the stories, I love collecting comic books, but do you remember when you loved comic books? Do you remember the first time you opened up a comic book and you saw Wolverine? The first time you saw him pop his claws out, the sound effects it made, you could almost hear it, the shininess of the claws. Do you remember the first time you saw Spider-Man swinging in the skies above New York City? The energy and motion and the art, the web spinning all around. Do you remember the first time you saw Superman flying through the skies, so perfectly drawn by the artist of the day? You could feel the motion. You could feel him soaring through the air. Do you remember the first time you saw Batman stalking through the shadows of Gotham City? What about the first time you saw Pitt decimating a biker gang in the pages of Pitt #1? Do you remember when you loved comic books? I ask this question because you're going to see yes, when we were younger, we loved comic books for one main reason. We still had an imagination back then. We hadn't been tainted by the worries of today or technology and special effects in movies. Comics were our getaway. That's where we went to experience the adventures and the worlds through the characters that we saw on the pages played out, and the word bubbles that so carried us through these stories. But somewhere along the lines, we lost that. And why is that? Well, partly we grew up. The imagination we had before went to the wayside. Movies and technology increased to a day where everything we imagined in our minds back when we were kids, we can now see played out in perfect green screen animation. But more than that, comic books as a medium have changed over the years. The emphasis on characters and story and character growth has gone to the wayside, replaced more by political activism, forced diversity, gender swapping. Generally, stories are focused on everything except the superhero themselves. Why did we love superheroes when we were kids? The superheroes gave us something more than ourselves, something to strive to. We saw characters that we could relate to on a personal level, going through awesome stories and adventures, as well as adversity. Spider-Man was a character that routinely messed up and had to live with the consequences of his actions. Then we got into the anti-hero phase, where these characters were darker. Their ambitions were not to fight crime, were not really to save people, but more or less deal in the life situations that they were a part of. Everything still played into the imagination and connected with us on a personal level. I remember spending hours as a kid, sitting on my floor, in my room, stacks of comics all around me, flipping through every page, just living and dying by the moment. Falling in love with the beautiful art that I was seeing from guys like Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, Todd McFarlane, yes, even Eric Larson. But Mark Silvestri, Dale Keown. These guys, these artists were guys that would change my life significantly, put me on a path to where I want to be and path to where I am to this day. Do I remember when I loved comics? I absolutely do remember when I loved comics. And that love of comics has carried me through to this very moment, to the time I'm producing my own comic book, in hopes I can bring back that love for somebody else, as well as rekindle my own love for comics. We live in an era now where the mainstream comic book companies are more interested in telling you what the sexuality of a character is, or the struggle of a character because of its skin color. Gone are the times of the X-Men just surviving against all odds, against amazing villains, against a world that hated them. Stories that showed us how to stay together as a family, as friends, without pushing any kind of political ideology. These stories, I believe, allowed us to fall into the imaginations of our youths and become part of that world, to identify as these characters, to go through the struggles and their victories as one. And we could revisit those again and again and again in the pages of these comic books. Now, today, we see A shell of what the industry used to be. A shell of what these stories were. A shell of these characters. No longer the characters that were represented in the days of our youth. Now just mindless shells push out ideology and tribalism that caters to one point of view. Do you remember when you loved comic books? Can we say that today? Do we really love comic books today? Or are we hoping and praying that that feeling is going to come back at some point? We spend most of our time now in the indie comic book scene, investing in creators that are trying to bring back that feel, that vibe that we so long for. And we are getting it, that is for sure. But that love, the innocence, the pure love that we had when we were younger is gone. Taken from us, stolen from us. We have been robbed of our youth, so to speak. But this is the time to bring it back. We can fall in love with comic books again. We can fall in love with characters like Reaper Destroyer, like Graveyard Shift, Cyberfrog, Hit. This is the time to support indie creators who are going to bring back that love for comic books. Hopefully in a couple years, someone can look back and say, I remember when I loved comics. And that is today. So just remember, we can always look back to the good old days, and we can remember Spider-Man. And first time you see Ghost Rider riding his bike, flaming wheels, a flaming skull, whipping that chain around. We can look back to a time of the death of Superman and the breaking of Batman's back, and the Age of Apocalypse. All these wonderful stories, the Dark Phoenix saga. They will always be there to spark our imagination and bring back some resemblance of what comics used to be. But moving forward, we can make a love for a new generation of readers. And that's what we're all here for. So with that being said, everybody, support independent comics as I always say. And also check out my book, Reaper Destroyer, live on Indiegogo today. Thank you all so very much. Have a great one. I will talk to you all later.